Welcome everybody to the Alexa Tech Talk series. My name is Scott Dart. I'm a solutions architect on the Alexa team. And today I'm going to be joined by my colleague Greg Bulmash. And together we're going to be talking to you about skill quality and how to make your skills even better. And so what do we mean by skill quality? This is a very broad topic and hopefully one that's applicable to developers of all shapes and sizes. So whether you are an accomplished developer who's got dozens of skills live in the store, or maybe you're just thinking through the first idea you have for a skill, skill quality applies to everybody. And it's one of these things that you never can stop learning. And the good news is that it's never too late to start thinking about skill quality. Wherever you are in the life cycle of your development journey, you can stop and dig in to skill quality and improve it to make your skills better. And so let's talk a little bit about the software development lifecycle. We're all familiar with variations of this. You start off by thinking of an idea and then you flesh that out. You go through the design process and the development process and so on. And we're going to be talking about each step of this process along the way and how you can approach skill quality during each of these steps, because you're going to be doing different tasks and activities in each phase and use different tools. So we really want to spend some time walking through each one. And to kick it off, let's talk about just the planning phase, because really skill quality starts with a great idea for a skill, a great use case, one that works really well in voice and is going to be delightful for your customers. At Amazon, we like to talk about working backwards from the customer need. And so if you start from that premise of finding something that is going to be really delightful for your customers to do through voice, you're going to be set up for success. But you don't neglect that step of really taking time to think during the planning phase about what those delightful experiences can be, because that'll really set you up for success down the road. And now I'm going to hand off to Greg, and he's going to dig into the design process a little bit more. Greg, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. It's said that every great painting begins with a great drawing. And if a skill is a painting, the interaction model is the drawing. So I'm going to talk briefly about two methods of improving your model, one analog and one digital. Alexa interactions are supposed to feel like natural human interactions, and the best way to get that natural feel is to start with natural human interactions. Find friends, strangers, family members, co-workers. Sit down with them and role play an Alexa interaction. The trick is to only give them one instruction, the task they're supposed to complete. This might be the primary task of your skill, like ordering a pizza, or a subtask of the skill, like checking on the pizza's status. You play Alexa and have the other person play the customer. Keep track of what they say and how they say it. If you're too prescriptive about how they interact with your skill, it becomes frustrating and clunky because you're regularly having to give instructions or tell them they weren't understood. This is your opportunity to collect different ways people will say things, especially those you might not think up yourself, and design your skill to handle them. So, to help me out, I invited along my popular Alexa Live guest star, Spokesaurus Rex. As a fair warning, Rex is a puppet. Rex is not a dummy. Aw, thank you! Nice to be here! And as you may have just noticed, I am not a ventriloquist. My lips move. Now, Rex, the reason I asked you to join me is I need to plan out a banking skill. Pretend I'm Alexa and try to find out if a check cleared. All right. Alexa, did Stevie D cash that check I sent him? You have 3 banking skills configured. Would you like Corleone Savings and Loan? Yes. When did you write the check? I don't know. 2 or 3 weeks ago? What was the amount? 3 large. Your check to Stevie D, number 1042, for $3,000 was cashed 12 days ago. Can I help you with anything else? And scene. Wait. I want to check my bank balance again. Note that I thought through the information I'd need. Who the check was made out to, how much it was for, and the date. But Rex gave me a date range instead of a specific date, and used slang for the amount. If I go through this again with other people or other dinosaurs, I'll run into different types of responses to my requests for information, and I can design my interaction model to handle them. By making it easier for your customers to interact with your skill the way they talk, you decrease friction, increase comfort, and the good experience makes them more likely to use the skill again. Now, the next logical step is to create an interaction model that's going to be able to handle all of those utterances you collected. NLU, or Natural Language Understanding Evaluation, is like test-driven development for your interaction model. You'll find the Evaluate Model button in the upper right of most of the Build tab pages having to do with your invocation, intents, or slots. Click it and you get a variety of options. Utterance Profiler lets you enter one utterance and find out how it's being processed. For NLU Evaluation, however, you evaluate a set of utterances and set pass-fail conditions. You can create an annotation set using our editor or use the bulk edit option, which means uploading all your annotations as an array of JSON objects. The one shown above is for a fictional skill called Above Average Apes, which would be a knowledge base about giant apes in the movies. I can set an utterance, what intent it should trigger, what slots should be filled, and what values they should have. The premise of test-driven development is that you create your tests first, then code until they pass. This is similar, but instead of writing programming code, you create your interaction model. Here are 4 hypothetical examples from an Above Average Apes annotation set. With a base Hello World template to start from, they all fail because there is no how big is ape intent or any slots defined. Once I add the intent, slot, and sample utterances, I can run it again and the tests pass. Yay! Before I've written a character of handler code, I've used NLU evaluation to test and make sure that the right intent and slot values will be passed to it. So, the earliest and best thing you can do to ensure skill quality is build a quality interaction model. And 2 great tools for that are gather and test. Gather sample utterances using role-playing. Use those utterances to test your interaction model before you write the code to handle them. Now we get to debugging, and the next step is to build your handlers and start handling the intent requests from Alexa. When I'm developing, I'll regularly stop and test to make sure my handlers are responding as expected. Not every error crashes the skill. Debug early, debug often, and make sure the results that are coming back are the results you intended. It's not good if someone says, what's the weather in Scotland today? And the reply is frozen peas. Although it's possible. I like using the simulator because I like to hear the results. The downside is that I have to repeat the same utterances over and over, typing them into the simulator. One trick for speedrunning it is that once Alexa begins to speak, I can send my next utterance immediately. So in the scenario in the slide, while that short audio is playing, I'm already typing yes. But this is just one of 4 options. Another option is the ASK Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. This simulator doesn't play the audio, but it does allow you to use the up arrow to repeat utterances, just like the command line. It also has a lot of other great features like a built-in debugger function that allows you to run the code currently on your local system instead of what's at your AWS Lambda or other configured HTTPS endpoint for the skill. We'll dig into that in a minute. Another option is the Alexa Skills Kit command line interface. Using ASK Dialog, you can have a text-based interaction with your skill. Even more importantly, you can record the list of utterances from your session to a JSON file that you can use with ASK Dialog and its replay option. This helps you speedrun a session because different replay files can take you to different points in your skill for different test scenarios. If you actually want to script this out so you're getting and responding to the Alexa responses, or you're trying to write automated tests, you can use the Skill Management API, or SMAPI. To handle some of the authentication and formatting, you can also use the SMAPI SDK. We're trying to cover a lot in this talk, so I'm going to get very high level here. You'll use the Simulate Skill v2 method to send your utterance to Alexa. You'll get back an OK and a simulation ID. You can then, in a few seconds, use the simulation ID with Get Skill Simulation v2 to get back the results of the utterance. For multi-turn interactions, it's important to understand the Simulate Skill v2 method requires an argument that tells Alexa to force a new session or use the current one. So, force a new session with the first utterance, then use the default session for the subsequent utterances. If test-driven design is your thing, this is the tool to help you create a suite of automated tests and code until they pass. We're going to test until all of those scenarios we gathered in role-playing work. But even when your model's right, code can be touchy. So what do you do when you get, "There was a problem with the selected skills response"? Or your code's error handler responds, "Sorry, I had trouble doing what you asked," like in the Hello World template. Here I've created an error by trying to access a property of an undefined property in the code snippet in the box on the right. In the box on the left is a link to Amazon CloudWatch. This is configured for you with an Alexa hosted skill, but you can easily use CloudWatch with AWS Lambda if you're hosting your endpoint there. So if I follow the CloudWatch link, boom. If I go into CloudWatch and look at the latest log stream, there it is. When I expand it, there's the error message and the line that caused it. This is actually sent out by a console.log statement in the error handler for the skill. Any debug logging or other logging you need to add to your code, you can add and it will show up in the CloudWatch logs. Additionally, Alexa Hosted offers a selected subset of CloudWatch and Lambda features. If you're hosting your skill in your own AWS account, you can access additional features, like setting alarms in CloudWatch for when specific events or errors show up in the logs. They can trigger a variety of processes and help you respond quickly when issues rear their quality-chewing heads. Now, I talked about the simulator in the ASK Toolkit for Visual Studio Code about 5 slides ago. 5 slides ago. Good times. I also mentioned that you can run your skill from your computer instead of the configured HTTPS endpoint with the toolkit. This is helpful in a few ways. 1, you get that handy dandy debug console, so you're not having to open up log streams in CloudWatch. It's just there. It saves a couple of steps. 2, you don't have to deploy your code to the development stage every time you want to see if your fix worked. You just hit the refresh button in the debug panel and try your skill again. And 3, you get additional debugger functions you may be used to from the JavaScript developer tools in Visual Studio or in most browsers like breakpoints, watches, etc. And what do you do when you're done with these amazing tools? Scott, tell them what they've won.
Thanks, Greg. Now that you've developed your skill, let's talk about the process for getting that skill published. And that's going to involve the testing and certification process. But before we get too deep into certification itself, I want to talk about a process of A/B testing. We could have talked about this earlier in the talk during the planning phase or the development phase, but this is a form of testing, so we're talking about it here. But A/B testing is a very powerful technique that's used by the top software developers in the world, and it's really based on the scientific method where you take a hypothesis, you run experiments on those hypotheses, you analyze the data, and you come up with a conclusion about what the right path for your particular software project should be. And let's go into a few details about why this is so powerful and what it can do for your skill experiences. So what if I told you that you could increase your revenue by 17%? That'd be pretty interesting, right? What if I told you you could do that by just changing one word in one prompt? Well, this is a real-world anecdote from one of our developers, Matchbox, and they develop a skill called Question of the Day, which is a very popular skill, tens of thousands of reviews, over a 4-star rating. And their chief content officer, Sarah Andrew Wilson, was on the VUX World podcast a while ago, and she shared this really compelling anecdote about how Matchbox uses A/B testing to test everything in their skill, big and small. And in this particular case, they changed one word of their upsell message, and they tested that, and they found that by just changing one word, they could increase their conversion of their upsell message by 17%. And that's super powerful to me. What I want you to take away from this is not, oh, what's that word? I should use that word, because that's not really the point. The point is that they found the wording that works for them and their customers and their skill experience, and you need to find what works for your customers and your skill experience. And it's really the methodology that we want to sell here. And the methodology, in this case, is A/B testing. And so let's talk a little bit about how that works. So it really comes down to breaking your customers into different cohorts. And so by A and B, you could have a control cohort, which gets the mainline experience of your skill. And this is maybe 80 or 90% of your customers. But when customers come into your skill, if it's a new customer you've never seen before, you can kind of, roll the dice and do a little random allocation and sort them either into that control group, like everyone else, or you can sort them into a treatment cohort. And you can have multiple of these. So you could have an A treatment group, a B treatment group, as many as you want. And then what you're going to do is you're going to treat these different cohorts differently. And so the control cohort might get the standard upsell messaging, but the treatment A group might get a little different wording, and the treatment B group might get even another different wording. And so then what do we do with that? We let this experiment run in the wild for some period of time, and it's really up to you for how long you run this, and it's going to depend on how many customers you have. If you have a lot of customers coming to your skill, you can gather data and analyze it very quickly. If you have smaller customer base, it might take a while to see the results, but the results should be pretty clear. And so, for here, I'm showing a simple example where the treatment group for A is outperforming the control group and outperforming the treatment B group. And so the answer here would be very clear. Let's whatever the treatment A, functionality was, that's what we want everybody to get because it's more effective. And the real value of doing this sort of experimentation in your live skill in the wild is that you see the same customers who are side by side on the same day of the week having different outcomes. And the more you can see this in bulk, in aggregate across many customers, the more compelling those findings are. Because it can be very tempting just to say, well, how about I just test this wording for this week and maybe I'll try another wording next week. But you really don't know, were there other external factors that happened during those weeks where, maybe you would have seen some seasonal drop off, maybe there was some holiday or something that week. And it's kind of hard to tell what was the real effect. Was it because of this behavior change that you made, or was it just simply, that was a slow week for your skill, or maybe a busy week for your skill. But when you're doing these A/B testing live, side by side, you can eliminate a lot of those external factors. And so it can be a very powerful technique, and you can have as many experiments running as you want at any given time, and always be experimenting, and always just have this mindset of your skill is never done. It can always be improved, sometimes in small things like the wording of a prompt, or maybe it's where the prompt happens, or what functionality you should offer. So it's really up to you to devise the right experiments for your skill that are going to really bring you those insights as to what's working. And that's the methodology that's going to help you refine your skill experience over time to make it even more compelling and higher quality. Okay, now let's move on to talk about unit testing a little bit. So Greg talked about testing during his section. He talked about debugging. And of course, you're all familiar with those techniques and they're very valuable. And so what's the difference between just debugging and unit testing? Well, for me, unit testing is more about, repeating an entire path through a skill. So here I've got a simple like ordering type of skill. I've got a welcome message. I might be placing a new order or reordering an old order. And so the path that I've highlighted in red, that could be one unit test. I always want to test these three turns, a customer coming into the skill, placing a new order, and then they're going to change the location of the where they want the order filled from. And I just want to make sure that that path continues to work, because we've all been through this experience where you've made what you think is a very safe change in a very isolated part of a piece of software. And, lo and behold, it has some unintended consequences. It introduces some bug in some totally unrelated part of your skill or your software that you weren't anticipating. And so that's really what unit testing is designed to find. So you can develop this whole suite of unit tests, and every time you make a change or if you're about to do a big check-in, run all those unit tests and really make sure that you haven't unintentionally introduced some regression into your skill that you might not have found before it went live. And so what are some of the ways that you might do this? Well, a lot of these are going to be similar to what Greg was talking about earlier. You can use the developer console or the VS Code plugin to test interactively with the simulator. You can also use the command line interface or SMAPI to do this in a more automated fashion. Another thing that I like to use is I like to use the Lambda test events. If your skill is based on Lambda, you can just go right into the developer portal in the simulator, and you can grab that whole JSON payload that is sent as the request and configure that as a Lambda test event. So if you're just testing your Lambda and you want to, again, have that suite of unit tests, you can just reproduce any single turn in your skill just in Lambda and do all that testing there as well. So you can kind of do this regression test pass just against your Lambda based on a variety of different skill states. And then finally, I'll talk about a company called Bespoken.io. And this is a company that is a third-party company, and they offer testing services. So they have a declarative model for building unit tests. And then the nice thing about this is once you've built this suite of unit tests, not only can you use it to quickly regression test your skill and find out if you've introduced any problems, but you can also then use those same tests to live monitor your skill once it's out in the wild and make sure that even though you may not have changed something, everything is still working the way you expect it to work and that your customers are really experiencing the highest quality skill as possible. After unit testing, let's talk about beta testing. So why beta test? And what do we mean by beta testing? So the beta testing is testing your skill experience with real live customers. These may be friends and family, people you know, or maybe they're total strangers to you. And so again, this comes back to the question of why do we beta test? Well, in voice, it's very simple. If I put a list of utterances in front of you and ask you to read them, you'll read them the same way every time. But human beings don't actually act like that. If I didn't give you a written list of utterances and I just gave you instead a task to accomplish, you might ask for the same thing different ways, different times through the skill. The wording that you choose is going to change. And not only is the wording that you choose going to change, but the wording that I choose is going to be different than the wording that you choose or that someone else chooses. And especially important to capture inputs from people with different cultural backgrounds and different accents because they will phrase things differently and they will be understood differently. So the more real customers that you can test your skill in front of, the more robust your skill is going to be because you're going to run into all of these unanticipated inputs for one, just in terms of, I didn't expect someone would ask for that. I didn't expect that somebody would word something that way. But now you can add coverage to your interaction model to handle all those things. And then finally, I'll add this quote here from Jeff Bezos. He says, customers are always beautifully, wonderfully dissatisfied. And I couldn't agree with this more. Your customers are going to give you great feedback. And this feedback can also often be frustrating. You've been working hard on a skill, you know how it works, and they just don't understand it for some reason. Well, it can be easy to be frustrated by that, but instead try and change your mindset to think of that as a gift. Those people are giving you valuable feedback that you can now use to make your skill better. If you read reviews that are negative, it can be easy to be frustrated by that, but take that feedback for what it's worth. Use that feedback to make your skill better because that will benefit all of your customers down the road. Now, there's a couple ways to go about beta testing. For one, you can just go into the developer console in the distribution tab and change the availability. And in this tab, you can configure a beta test. So you will enter in a number of email addresses, and that will now provision the development version of your skill to these beta testers. They will get an invitation in the email that they can accept, and now they will be able to interact with the development version of your skill before anybody else can. Now, that can be very powerful. Again, like if you may just be sending this to other people in your company, or this might be kind of a friends and family beta, or maybe you have some community that you are engaged with through a Facebook group or something like that. I urge you to get as broad and diverse set of feedback as you can, but also to close the loop with those people. So not just to give them the skill, but make sure that they have some way of giving feedback to you about their experience. So that might be, you might want to send them a survey, or either by email through some other kind of tool, but you really want to be able to get the insights from those people, not just run a beta test and forget about it, and hopefully they'll let you know if there was some big problem. You really want to solicit their feedback in a meaningful way. Another way to go about this, another third-party company, is a company called Pulse Labs, and pulselabs.ai. And this is one of their core offerings, is to facilitate user tests. So they will recruit panels of representative customers in the real world for you, so people you don't know, and they will facilitate the distribution of your skill to those customers. And not only will those customers fill out surveys and give you meaningful feedback, you'll also get transcripts of the skill experience, so that you might be able to track down bugs just by looking through the results of those transcripts yourself. And I've personally worked with Pulse Labs over the past several years, and we've tested hundreds of skills together with some of the top developers in the world. And the thing that's remained constant is that no matter how good the developer is, we're always finding bugs at the user testing stage. It doesn't matter whether this is a skill that I've tested or that the developer has tested. As soon as you broaden that audience to real world customers, and the more the better, you almost always are going to find bugs, and often serious bugs that you're really going to be glad that you caught before it went out into the wild. So now that you've got your skill, you've sent it through certification, it's passed, you've tested it, and it's published and it's live. Now what do you do? Here is really where the fun stuff starts, because now you'll start to get a bunch of data back on how your skill is performing and what that means, and can allow you to really further improve the skill experience. Because this isn't a process that ends. If you go back to that software development lifecycle, it's not a circle that just stops, it just keeps going. So once you release, now you start to plan the next version of your skill based on the feedback you've learned from the first version. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is retention. So you may have noticed in the Analytics tab of the Developer Console, there's a section on retention, and you see this chart here, which might be a little bit confusing to you at times. So let's break it down. Let's understand what's the data that we're seeing here, why is it important, and what can you do with it? So first, what is retention? So retention means, if you had 100 customers that came to your skill today, retention is the measure of how many of the customers who use your skill today will use your skill tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year. It's how many of those customers have come back to be repeat customers of your skill. And to me, there is no more important measure of quality than retention. You can run all kinds of advertising campaigns to fill the top of the funnel and get a lot of customers into your skill. But if you think of your skill as it's like a bucket, it holds a certain number of customers. Is your bucket leaky at the bottom? When someone comes into the skill, do they instantly love it and do they come back and use it the next day, or do they try it and they kind of fall out of the bucket because the experience wasn't for them? It didn't really resonate with them. Maybe they ran into a bug, maybe they just didn't like the content, whatever the case may be. The bigger the holes are in your bucket, the more people who are running out, the harder it is for you to grow the audience of your skill, because you have to keep feeding the top of the funnel more and more just to keep pace with the people that you're losing. So, a lot of people are asking me about, well, how do I improve the discoverability of my skill or things like that? I want to drive more customers to it. And I always kind of turn it back on them and say, well, Are you ready? If I sent you 1 million customers to your skill tomorrow, is the skill ready? Would all the 1 million customers come back the next day, or would most of them try out the skill and abandon it? And that's really the question that you want to ask yourself. You want to make sure that you are making your skill as solid as possible, as delightful as possible, really, again, working backwards from those customer needs, because that's what's going to make people come back to your skill. Okay, so bringing it back to the data, so how can we measure what's going on here? So in the upper left here, you will see a number of customers. So the leftmost column is, you see that there are rows with dates. And so what that means is during that date range, that many customers came into the skill. Okay, so that's just your pure engagement numbers. Now as we look over to the right side of the chart, you'll see the columns that say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means 1 week following, 2 weeks following, 3 weeks following, etc. So if I have 1,000 customers come in during a time period, and then 1 week following that, I've got 15% of those remaining, that's my measure of retention. I've retained 15% of the population that used the skill on that day. And that's pretty significant. And you look, on the following weeks 2, 3, 4, you're typically going to see it drop off, but your challenge as a developer is to make all of these numbers as high as possible. And no skill is going to have 100% retention across the board, but the more you can understand the drivers of retention and measure whether or not your efforts are having an impact, the more likely you are to be able to drive these numbers up. But it just starts with awareness and measuring, and then as we talked about before, running experiments and then checking to see if the experiments that you're running are having an effect. Okay, now let's talk about a tool called Intent History. So once you have a skill live and you've got some customers using it, you can go into the developer console, and in the Build tab under Intents, you can see this Intent History section here. And this is going to show you aggregated, anonymized, frequent utterances that your customers have said to your skill. And so you'll see, a customer might have said something and it mapped to this intent. Great. But you'll also see things that they said that you didn't expect them to say. When you're defining your skill, you're putting together the interaction model with all the sample utterances and mapping those to intents, but inevitably, you're going to miss some variations of sample utterances and slot values and things like that. And the intent history is really where you can go to see what you're missing. Because once more than 10 unique users in a day say the same thing, it's going to show up in your intent history here. And now you can take the action of mapping that to the right intent, because it might be going to a fallback intent or it might be going to the wrong intent entirely. But this is a great way for you to kind of validate that the interaction model that you've built is really robust and is really handling everything. It can also be a way of validating that you have the right content. For example, let's say that you're a developer of animal sound skills and you've got a menu of sounds that people can ask for. But you didn't deliver sounds for bear sounds for whatever reason, but you see a lot of people are asking for bear sounds. Well, this can also then inform your content roadmap. Well, I'm going to look in my intent history, I'm going to see what people are asking for the most that I don't have, and that's what I'll prioritize in terms of new content. And now we have this other tool called the interaction path analysis, and this can look a little overwhelming at first, but basically what this is showing you is it's showing the most common paths that customers have taken through your skill. And you can see this by the size of these blue blocks. So level 1 is the first turn of dialogue that customers have interacted with your skill. And so you see like the launch request is the largest source of customers there. So that's just customers who are saying open skill name. And then below that, you see there's a couple smaller ones. And these would be more like a one-shot invocation where, a customer might say like, ask this skill to do X, Y, and Z. It's a little less common, but people do ask for that. And so you can kind of see what are the more common paths. Now, the interesting thing is you see all these little red kind of waterfalls, and in this screenshot, I'm hovering over one of those, and you can see how many customers you're losing at that particular juncture. And the way you can use this interaction path analysis is to try and role play yourself. If you see a large number of customers being lost at a certain turn, try and retrace those steps. So what did they say at level 1 to get to the right branch of level 2, to get to the right branch of level 3, to now have a bad experience with the skill, potentially. So listen to the response that Alexa gives them. Is that an appropriate one? Is it delightful? Maybe it's too long or too wordy. All of those things could be sources of friction that might cause people to drop out of the skill immediately. And then, of course, look at your the launch request. Like, are a lot of people coming to your skill and then immediately leaving? That might be, again, a sign of some sort of friction in your welcome message. Or maybe it's even higher level than that. It could be that your skill description or the name are misleading, not intentionally, but people are not sure what they're going to get. And once they experience the skill, they might find that this isn't really what they were looking for, and they abandon it. So this is a very powerful tool for helping you to retrace those steps. And again, plug the leaks in your bucket so that you don't lose people unexpectedly. Okay, now that you understand the interaction path analysis tool and how to use it, I'm going to hand it back to Greg, and he's going to dig into some of the additional metrics that are available through the developer console. Greg, take it away.
Take the handoff. There we go. Thanks, Scott. Overall, the Utterance dashboard helps you see larger trends in the number of utterances being processed for your skill. How many utterances should a customer use in a session? Per week? Per month? You might be trying to figure out what a good number is, or you might have one in mind. If customers should get through a session in 11 utterances but take 15, dig down to see why. If utterances are trending downward or utterance responses are significantly lower than utterances, these are indicators of friction. For example, in the charts, we can see that the steepest decline in total and average utterances corresponds to an even steeper decline in utterance responses. What happened in that period? Did you release an update that broke something? What changed? You can dig down to see if one specific intent is skewing the results. The intent confidence and intent history reports can help you dig deeper if one is. Barge-ins are when the customer interrupts Alexa while Alexa is speaking. Rather than wait their turn, they use the wake word to stop Alexa. Barge-ins usually indicate the customer is frustrated because your response was wrong, or they're trying to correct it, or maybe the response is long-winded and they're trying to short-circuit it. Or maybe you presented an upsell too early and they're saying no before you can finish. But like the testing example a few slides back, they may be also speedrunning, aka challenging themselves to complete your skill as fast as they can, especially if your skill is a game. If you're pretty sure people aren't speedrunning, and if your barge-ins to utterances ratio is high, this is an indicator of friction. You can dig into your barge-ins by intent to see if specific intents are heavier than others. Look there for opportunities to make your responses more concise, more correct, or position them better. Terminations are when the customer ends the skill early. Could be a name-free interaction match with your skill wasn't quite right, or they got frustrated. Let's say in this period you had 60 terminations, but 3,000 customers. That's 2%. That also means 98% didn't quit early. And it's probably a good number. But if you had 300 customers and 60 quit, that's big. This metric needs to be looked at in context of the whole skill. Dig down by intent and use the interaction path tool to help you analyze where and why people are quitting. People are also unpredictable. There will always be unhandled requests. The important thing is to look at that number in the context of all the requests. If it's high, and high is relative, investigate. There's a regularly quoted number from an Old Forester research study that says 47% of customers will abandon a website if it takes longer than 2 seconds to load. Latency and response are measurements of how long your skill endpoint took to respond and the times it didn't. Optimizing your code, caching common responses, hosting your skill endpoints on an edge network. All of these can reduce the time it takes your skill to respond. If you're seeing high latency at periods of high traffic, you may need to work on scaling. If you're seeing failed responses, check your logs to see if errors terminated execution of your skill handler. Using analytics not only helps you spot, but diagnose areas of friction. By doing so regularly, you can improve customer experience, customer satisfaction, and customer retention. And there's nothing better than having happy customers. So today we talked about points within the software development lifecycle and how to optimize skill quality during them. Use role-playing and NLU evaluation for better design. During development and debugging, you have a host of tools. The simulator, the ASK CLI, the ASK Toolkit for Visual Studio Code, and the ASK SMAPI SDK. CloudWatch for debugging lambdas and the toolkit to debug on your own computer are also really useful. Scott covered A/B testing, unit testing, and beta testing, and then we each shared a few Alexa analytics reports that can help you spot areas where you can improve your skill based on how customers are interacting with it. So, from myself, Greg Bulmash, Scott Dart, and Rex, can I check my bank balance now? Thanks for watching and happy creating. Say bye, Rex. Bye, Rex! That is like the oldest joke in the world. Dude, I'm literally a dinosaur.